Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this very special episode of Straight to You from the Oxnard Police Department. It's a live Q&A about elder financial abuse. And this came up because there was a recent case that we wanted to highlight and kind of use as an example of things to look for and the types of crimes that are being committed to the elderly in our community, and do our best just to be aware of it and to prevent it before it happens. And joining us this evening are our Oxnard Police Department fraud investigator, Erica Escalante, and from Adult Protective Services, our supervising social worker, Carmen Wyttenbach. Thank you both for joining us.
We're glad to be here.
Yes, great to be here.
And my name is Paul Carganilla. I'm the Community Affairs Manager at the Oxnard Police Department. And we've been doing these live Q&As virtually here on the Facebook Live streams to better connect with our community. It started when COVID lockdowns occurred, and we just find it's a great tool to interact with everybody out there and find out what your questions are, what your concerns are, and see how we can address them in this virtual manner. So one way we can do that is by interacting with you live here on Facebook in the live chat. If you open the window, the video window, and there is a chat thread, go ahead and ask your questions there, and we'll make sure we get to anything you have questions about. It's my computer is echoing. Anything you've got questions about, we will be sure to get to those questions before the end of the feed here this evening. So again, even though we are virtual, please jump into the virtual room here and interact with us. Ask us anything, any questions you might have. We've got a couple of experts here to answer them. And I mentioned at the very top, this kind of came about because of a recent case that occurred that just kind of dropped into your basket of things to do here. Detective Escalante, do you want to tell us about this interesting situation?
Sure, Paul. So about 10 months ago now, a notary public was called to a man's home in Oxnard by his caregivers. The 93-year-old man was obviously suffering from dementia and did not understand the documents that his caregivers wanted him to sign to gift them a large amount of money. The notary public called the police and Adult Protective Services hotline to report this suspected elder financial abuse right away. A social worker and I began an investigation the very next morning. For my part, I was able to recover some stolen property and locate evidence that the caregivers had intent to steal more from the victim. I served a search warrant at the business offices of Elite Comfort Care for Seniors in Camarillo to find some of this evidence. The owner and 3 employees of that licensed home care service business have been arrested and are facing their arraignments for criminal charges next week in Ventura County Superior Court. As the fraud detective for the Oxnard Police Department, I'm responsible for investigating financial abuse crimes against elderly people. I wanted to share this case with the public in order to continue my investigation in case there are any additional victims or surviving family members out there who wish to make a report about Elite Comfort Care for Seniors. I also wanted to share this all too common problem of vulnerable older adults in our communities. This case was an example of an older person who was living alone with no family or friends nearby. As he fell further into cognitive decline, he wandered from his home a few times and was eventually hospitalized. Because his close friends and relatives were living far away, they did not know that he was hospitalized, and they actually reported him a missing person to the Oxnard Police Department. Our missing person specialist was able to locate him in the hospital and connect him with his family And then they were able to contract for his 24-hour care at home because he couldn't be released from the hospital since he lived alone and he needed 24-hour cares. That's when Elite Comfort Care for Seniors entered his life. So after several months of them providing care, and then this crime was reported, the social workers were able to come in and provide some services that ended up changing this man's living conditions for the better. I think it's really important for the public to know how adult protective services and the police work together to help people, and how important it is to make these reports to our agencies on behalf of your older friends, neighbors, and family members.
And if Carmen wants to touch on that at all about the working relationship between APS and the police department.
Yeah, we're really fortunate that we have a lot of meetings with various law enforcement agencies, and Detective Escalante comes to like our financial abuse specialist team meeting and our multidisciplinary team meeting. So in this case came across to us as an after hours call. We had the history with this client to know that he definitely lacked capacity and should not be signing any documents. And we also knew that he had quite a bit of financial assets. So immediately we were able to reach out to Detective Escalante directly to say, can we go out right away? Can we go? This is a really bad one. And later we were able to have a meeting with the DA and everybody else to really coordinate the services. And we knew if we were going to arrest the caregivers or get the caregivers out of the picture, we needed to get other caregiving in place. So we were able to coordinate getting other caregiving in place, getting the family to come out from out of state to help really step in and get a private fiduciary and get the legal power to protect him immediately. And without that partnership with Detective Escalante, it would not have been able to move so quickly.
Yeah, and it seems like what was the timeline from when it was first reported by the I'm forgetting the word now, it's escaping me. Notary, thank you. And us connecting the police department with adult protective services.
One day. We
literally not even.
Yeah, we literally got the call in the evening, and an officer went out that evening, and then APS and Escalante were out the next morning. So less than 24 hours, I believe, in this particular case.
Wow. And then so kind of walk us through like how you were able to work together as a team on this. What was the next step? I know we got kind of a Reader's Digest of the case, but as far as once you guys connected, what was the first point of emphasis, or what was the first thing we had to do?
Well, first, the night before, our patrol officer responded and wrote a crime report and made sure that APS was notified. The notary called both agencies, so that had been done. So the patrol officer started off by taking the report. Officer Tom Martin wrote an excellent report and collected some of the documents that night as evidence. And so I could begin the criminal investigation very quickly. The patrol officer and his sergeant even called me at home that night to let me know. And so the next morning I was heading out and the social worker was heading out, and we just met up at the house and went inside and contacted the victim and tried to assess the situation from there.
Yeah. And so is the first step kind of contacting family, or as far as like working with the victim in a case like this?
Well, I think Carmen would be able to speak to that. Because social workers were there, I could really focus on gathering more evidence for my investigation, and the social workers could focus on caring for the victim.
Yeah, in most cases, adult protective services would always contact the client or the victim first and do an assessment with the client, and get their agreement, their permission to reach out to family members and other parties. In this particular case, because we already had history and knew that this gentleman had significant mental health concerns and some significant cognitive impairments, the social worker in this case did call family right away, and to kind of put the family on notice, like, it's time to make your travel plans and get out to Oxnard because he's going to need help ASAP, especially if we need to get these caregivers out of here. And the extent to the concern about the financial abuse that was reported was such that we didn't want him to wait. So we did call family first and then went out that next morning to talk with the client.
And can you, I know that obviously this case is going to court, but are you able to talk about what kind of crimes you were able to uncover specifically?
Well, I initially just had the documents that the caregivers were trying to get the notary to notarize so that they could then access money from the victim's accounts. So I was looking to do an investigation like this. I have to look for all of the victim's accounts because this victim had dementia, and his first language was not English. And because of his cognitive levels, he couldn't communicate anymore very well in English at all. He reverted to his native language, which I didn't speak. And we didn't have any translators for that language. It wasn't like
What language?
Spanish.
What language was it?
In this case, it was French.
Okay.
So once his relative came, his relative was able to do a lot of translating for me. But initially, I just had to look around for clues to figure out where the victim banked so that I could start protecting his money by, I wrote search warrants because I needed to look at the account records to see if anything was stolen. And then I put freezes on the accounts until the probate court could allow the professional fiduciary to take over the accounting, because this man couldn't do his own financial management any longer. But I want to emphasize that this was a man that was 93 years old, and when he was in his prime, he was a very successful engineer and invented some things that caused him to have a great deal of personal assets. And then his wife passed away, and he was heartbroken and ended up wanting to move to a different house because his home he had lived in for many years reminded him too much of his wife. So he purchased a nice home in Oxnard and decided to live here by himself. But his cognitive decline just took over, and someone so capable in his younger years was now not able to conduct business the way he was accustomed to. And that's very difficult for someone to accept, especially when he was living all alone and didn't have a strong personal support system. I mean, as you can imagine, in being 93, most of his local friends had passed away, and the ones he knew were actually children of some of his former friends.
And I would like to just take a moment to remind the audience that while we have Detective Escalante here and Supervisor Wyttenbach, we're open to field any questions you might have about elder financial abuse. We are here in the live chat on Facebook. There's some friends saying hello. Jessica Jimenez says, great work, Detective. As Erica, great work, HSA, AFS. Debbie says, so proud to live in a community with such an effective and caring APS and police. Kathy says, so grateful for Detective Escalante's advocacy. And Michael says, I don't want to hear that these criminals get a slap on the hand and a fine, they shouldn't be able to do business again. Let's touch on that. What kind of penalties do they fit? Is it a possibility that the business gets shut down, or like does the crime can't be charged against the business? It would be the people who were involved in it, of course.
Oh, correct. So the people who were arrested were the owner of the business and the manager and a couple employees. So they did continue business after my investigation began because I called the state. This is a new, and Carmen can probably add some more information, but this type of home caregiving business is a newer licensed business for caring for older people with the state. And the laws were passed only a few years ago. And as far as enforcement of standards, at this point, they just have a database of complaints. So I called right away, and of course my complaint went into the database, but they didn't have any authority to investigate or shut down or put the business on probation or anything like that. The only requirement for these businesses is that all their employees go through a background check. So once they're convicted of a felony crime, they cannot work for a licensed home care business any longer. But Carmen can probably provide a little more about that, a history on the laws surrounding this type of organization.
Yeah, for a long time, if they were not providing any kind of medical care services, if it was non-medical caregiving, there were not a lot of requirements there for the staff, or, besides that background check, or a lot to do when there was complaints. And unfortunately, you would see agencies maybe get shut down or have bad reviews, have problems, and then kind of pop back up with a different name, maybe in a neighboring community, and start back over. So it can be difficult to find quality services and know what you're getting. And if somebody hasn't actually been arrested for a crime, they're going to pass that background check. So it's important to trust your instincts when you're interviewing these types of agencies, and call different community organizations to verify that they have got good reviews, that people, maybe people can recommend these agencies before you hire them. The Ventura County Area Agency on Aging can be a great resource for things like that to contact as well.
And we just before we took a break to look at the Facebook chat, we were talking about the situation, how this victim came to be so isolated and away from family. But really, if it weren't for that notary, there would be nobody raising a red flag. What can anybody who might find themselves in a situation where they have a loved one or a relative that is disconnected, are there any red flags or any warning signs they can look for as they try and keep tabs on their loved ones?
Really just keep tabs on your loved ones and try to stay involved. I think the biggest risk factor for financial abuse and a lot of other abuse is isolation. So seniors that are lonely, that don't have people checking on them. So, checking on your neighbors if they're seniors, checking in on your family members that are older can be really protective in itself. And so then you would notice if, hey, this caregiver has just bought a new car, that's really suspicious. Let me ask some questions about things like that. Or, we see a lot of seniors fall for different scams. They're targeted by scams. So it's good to know what's going on with your loved ones. So hopefully if they're getting being targeted for romance scams or being targeted for the grandparent scam, they'll ask you, they'll talk to you, they'll have neighbors and friends to go to before they're sending money off and things like that. So really just trying to prevent the isolation in the first place is one of the best things you can do.
Yes, and there's always the ability to call the local police department to check the well-being if you're not able to reach your older relative who lives far away, you know, and usually you talk once a week, maybe that would be great if you can do that. And then if they don't answer and you can't get a hold of them, you can call the police department for the town where your loved one lives, and we'll do a well-being check to make sure, you know, that they're home or something's not going wrong. And especially if there's a caregiving situation and suddenly you're having difficulty getting on the phone and having nice conversations like you used to, that's a red flag, because maybe the caregivers are preventing the older person from making those connections and having those conversations on the phone, because the caregivers don't want the older person to say something negative about what's going on, or, you know, anything like that, or raise any suspicions. So they just prevent that connection altogether. And that's really dangerous. So anytime, if you're far away, if you have suspicions, you can call for police to go check the well-being. If you get any specific information, you can call APS and they'll send a social worker. And then I had a recent case with neighbors who checked a lot on an elderly neighbor who ended up going in the hospital, going in the skilled nursing facility for rehab after a broken hip, and then moved into a temporary apartment for more therapy from caregivers. The woman ended up passing away, but her rings went missing, and the neighbors were actually able to identify the caregiver who took the rings, made a police report, and I actually was able to recover those rings for the family. So all it takes is people stepping up to look out for their older friends, neighbors, relatives, what have you, and letting people know, because the police and social services can connect people with a lot of different community resources out there, just to have more eyes and ears on people.
It's a great note. And before we got a great question in the chat here, but before we go to that, I just want to share, because we've been talking about contacting the police and APS. Here are a list of resources. I'll share this a couple of times before the end of the broadcast this evening, but you can also add this to the post on Facebook if you want to save the graphic, or here are local resources and just contact points, phone numbers, websites, and email addresses for everyone, all the agencies around the area that are very important and valuable in cases like the ones we are talking about this evening. And jumping over to the chat, Wayne asks, he says, I have an 86-year-old friend with a rental property, and they are being taken advantage of by the property manager. I see it. It's crazy how much money is being taken. Who can I refer her to for help?
I have not seen a lot of specific referrals dealing with a property manager, but APS is always willing to take the referral and go out there and talk with the client and, you know, do an assessment of what this contract would be with the property manager and investigate what the proper channels to report that would be.
And one of the resources we have, as Carmen mentioned earlier, are resource teams that meet. We have, besides law enforcement and social workers, we have representatives from Gray Law and the public guardians and the ombudsman and community advocates who come to our meetings as well. And that way we can get input from these other disciplines on how to help people. So by making a call to APS, it could be brought up to our other partners to get that type of advice. And interestingly, the case we were talking about earlier, that gentleman also had commercial real estate, that was being mismanaged due to the fact he had dementia and could no longer manage his properties. So the professional fiduciary has been able to get control and handle all of those assets as well.
Now, for anyone out there who is like me, and today might be the first time in their life they heard the term fiduciary, what does that refer to?
I know either of us can answer this one. Both deal with all the time. So, and in the terms of a private fiduciary or paying somebody to be a fiduciary, that's somebody that's a professional at handling somebody else's money for them.
Okay.
So you do pay for this services. Sometimes it's based on your income or based on how complicated your finances may be. And they can come in and set a bill paying system for you. And they have to work in your best interest. So they go in and they can protect your assets and protect what you're doing. And that can be, especially for people that are suffering from memory loss and are no longer able to make those decisions, that can be a really good way to protect their assets.
Definitely.
I can add a little bit.
Yeah. This
is where estate planning comes in handy too. If your loved one is a person who has some assets, they own their home outright. They've paid off their home. But if they have any more assets, stocks, bonds, investments, their IRA, whatever they're using to fund their retirement years, those types of assets would be best managed in a professional fiduciary situation. Perhaps a trust could be set up, and then name a successor trustee that could be named at any time, even before the person begins to lose cognitive ability. Have somebody in hand who could do that. That doesn't need to be a professional, but if there are, say, the person has 3 or 4 children and they don't want their children to fight with each other, maybe they would get a professional in that case to avoid family problems. But then it goes all the way down to people that may not own their home and maybe don't have all those assets. There are bill payers out there, and the people that can be the designee to manage even Social Security benefits to make sure that the bills are paid. So it varies depending on the amount of assets a person has and income a person has in how they can handle it. And obviously, if you don't have a lot, then you're going to find something that isn't going to cost quite as much. But if you have a lot of assets, it's probably worth it to look into making some plans that maybe it does cost a little bit, but in the long run, it's worth the peace of mind and for not only the older person and their well-being, but also their surviving family members.
We'll jump back really quick. I just noticed there was a question on the Facebook page, not in the thread of the video, but for anyone who's joining us late, she asks what the name of the business was. I believe she's probably asking about Elite Comfort Care for Seniors was the business in the story at the beginning here. And Kathy, this is on the topic of keeping an eye, checking in with our loved ones and keeping an eye on them. Kathy makes a really great point. We also need to be careful not to buy into the ageism philosophy that seniors are all suffering from dementia or cognitive impairment, hence discount their concerns about caregivers and family members.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Some cognitive decline is a very complicated issue. And we have a neuropsychologist on our team who's always telling us something new we didn't know about this topic, because there are even different medical conditions or nutritional issues that could look like cognitive decline, and it may not be. And even when people have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's or dementia, they are still able to do a lot of things for themselves and go about and enjoy life as normal as they want to. They just need a little bit extra help because it's a very unpredictable type of condition. And, you know, older people have a lifetime of experience, so they really know how to perceive things and also how to kind of fake it in a way. So for the scams and things, it's important to talk about it often and respectfully, because a lot of times they don't want to admit it, and they'll fake it. But then regarding caregivers, just like the commenter said, people will discount what they said. Oh, all older people are always paranoid. Well, that's not true. They notice things because they do have a lifetime of experience, and they might notice things that younger people won't notice right away. And they might be more suspicious because they have that experience. So we should listen. And at the same time, we should also talk to them about different risk things like the telephone and online scams that might be things they won't volunteer.
All right. We got a couple just joining us that didn't hear the story in the beginning, but the video will live in perpetuity on our Facebook page. As soon as it's over here, you can go back and take a listen to the case we were discussing. But Debbie asks if there are other possible victims in this case, if we can say, and I think that's a good opportunity to share this. Are you looking for more possible victims?
Well, I'm always looking for more victims. You know, anytime I've identified some suspects that I know have had the opportunity and the exposure to other victims, that's always a potential. So I'm not saying there are any additional victims, but if there are, it's not too late to report them, and they could possibly be added into the case. I said earlier, the suspects have been already arrested. Charges have been filed in court, and they face arraignment next week. And from there, the case will go through court. But even while cases are going into court, I can still continue to investigate.
And Kathy asks, how challenging is it to separate undue influence from the right to make the wrong decision? Separate undue influence from the right to make the wrong decision.
I'm going to give that one to Carmen.
I'm going to say it's very difficult. So I would say oftentimes our social workers will feel kind of in their guts that instinct that this person is being the victim of undue influence, that you just feel that this caregiver or whoever is the perpetrator of the abuse against the senior is really exercising a lot of control over the person. But proving that, of course, can be very difficult. And then the clients also, if they've been very isolated from other people, which is typical in abuse dynamic, that caregiver, that person is going to create a feeling of dependency. You know, your kids don't love you. Nobody likes you. Your sister, you know, she never calls you anymore. I'm the only one that cares for you. I'm the only one that loves you. They really create that sense of dependency. So the client themselves may not recognize that they're being the victim of undue influence. They feel like, no, this person's great. They're taking care of me. You know, my family's terrible. My kids don't call me anymore. And this guy pays a lot of attention to me and he's showing up. So that it can be extremely difficult. Like Detective Escalante mentioned previously, we're really lucky to have a team of a lot of professionals with APS. So we can have our public health nurses go out and do a medical assessment with the client to try to rule out any medical concerns, see what's going on with their medications. If they've been to the doctor, if the client gives us permission, we can talk to the doctors about things and maybe get a sense of this client's history. Sometimes the doctor may share, yeah, the client used to always come in with her family, and now, we haven't seen the family in a long time. It's very unusual, and give us more information to think there might be undue influence at work. And if we feel that it's necessary, we also have the neuropsychologist that Detective Escalante mentioned as well. And he does a very thorough cognitive assessment with that tests different facets of somebody's cognitive functioning. And one of the things that he looks at is their susceptibility to undue influence, and if he feels like they're at risk of that in the assessment. So that can really help us move forward. But it's not easy.
I'm muted, of course. As we have a lull in questions in the chat, we're going to be live for about the next 10 minutes or so. So if you're watching and you have any questions for either Detective Escalante or Supervisor Wyttenbach, please enter it in the Facebook thread. And Erica touched on briefly the other kinds of, what are the other common kinds of crimes against the elderly financially, fraud-wise?
Well, by and large, the most commonly reported is the scams, all the way from romance scams that go on for a long time, sweepstakes or investment scams. And these can be done in person. They could be done over the telephone, and now they could be done over the computer. And then the computer has the whole new realm of like the computer takeover, the service, like, oh, your computer has a virus, you have to install this software, and the next thing you know, the bad guy's taken over the computer. And older folks are sometimes so glad someone volunteered to help them with their computer that they let it happen and don't realize that the person's getting their credentials for their bank account. So I would say that those types of scams are the most reported. And then next to that would be caregiver taking advantage of the older person. And that's whether the caregiver is a professional caregiving licensed person, or more common, it is a friend that just suddenly becomes a friend. Maybe they met at church or at some other social function or in the neighborhood. And I see a lot of these types of predatory people. They move on from one older person to another, and they just like basically mooch off them. Or it could be a relative who may have a substance abuse problem sometimes as well, who does the same, kind of mooches off the older relative. So it runs a gamut. And when it's family members, it's really difficult because there can be a big history of family issues going way back. And obviously I can't come in and fix all that, and neither could a social worker right away. But that's one of the reasons we have so many other organizations that help out. There's even a mediator who comes and participates in our task force at times. So yeah.
One of my guilty pleasures is watching those YouTube videos where the hackers get hacked by the scammers, get scammed by the guys who are really good at computers too. But it's so scary to see, like, I didn't even realize it was like that easy for someone to just get into your computer and control it and get all of your things. And is there any way to know, like, I guess, it doesn't matter your age, but is there ever a good time to let someone control your computer from afar?
Never. Only at work. Like if you're at work and your IT people want to control your work computer, but your home computer, no, never.
I'd say absolutely not. And your work IT people, make sure it's your work IT people. Like hang up on them, call them back, make sure it's the right number that's calling you, because there's all kinds of business takeover scams and stuff too, where people try to impersonate, other employees and things like that. So even with work, be suspicious.
Yeah. Detective Escalante has a saying that I often hear when we're warning the public about scams, and it's just don't send money to people you don't know who they are. Make sure you know who they are before you send them gift cards. And the IRS will never ask for gift cards. I know that. Deborah asks in the chat, as a senior with no nearby family, what should I look for? What should I ask about caregivers or fiduciaries in seeking one out?
I would recommend contacting an agency like Ventura County Area Agency on Aging and talking to them about recommendations. They also put a publication together every year called the Live Well Guide with a lot of resources in it that have been kind of vetted, that are known in the community, licensed and bonded and things like that. And if you ever do get strange calls, don't hesitate to even call the APS hotline and, ask us about a strange letter or call you got. Hey, have you heard of this? Is this a scam? We go to these meetings to, every month, a financial abuse specialist team meeting, to do our best to stay on top of the scams. So we usually know the newest ones. It is a little bit like whack-a-mole. They're always coming up with something new, but definitely reach out to agencies to find recommendations for caregivers and fiduciaries. There is a licensed professional fiduciary website that's listed in the resources where you can find ones near you, but then call around and ask people in the community, have you heard good things about this person? Do you recommend them? Look at what their reviews are and things like that.
And also Gray Law is another resource in our county, and they would be a good place to go to ask questions about your situation. Do you need to set up a living trust, and what kind of estate plans do you have? Because those things need to be done before a person gets in an incapacitated state, no matter their age. I mean, anyone could get in a car accident and get in a coma. So that's an important thing to consider if you have any significant assets that need to be managed while you're incapacitated.
Definitely. Everybody should get their legal documents in order. And nobody ever likes to think they're going to get old. Nobody ever likes to think they're going to become incapacitated. But nobody's planning for that. So everyone's always putting those things off, but it's so important. It can really protect you.
I did it again. I was saying all great advice, great information. What do we have before we go this evening? Is there anything that you wanted to touch on? Any information you wanted to pass along before we say goodnight?
If people
go ahead.
If people would like to contact Adult Protective Services, they can call the hotline 24 hours, 7 days a week. It's on the slides, but it's 805-654-3200. And if you are not a mandated reporter, if you're just a concerned citizen, that report can be made anonymously. If you do share your information, that can be very helpful for the investigation, but we will not tell the client who called. The reporting parties are protected. We don't share that information when we go out. We just say, hey, somebody was concerned about you. We wanted to see how you were doing.
And there's also a National Center for Elder Law, Legal Resources, NECLR. And you can Google that and you can find a whole bunch of information about the different types of fiduciary levels that are available and what the responsibilities and duties are for each. Like, what's the difference between a power of attorney and a trustee on a trust or a conservatorship? These are all complicated things that we don't think about, and we need to make sure we're informed about them when we have the ability and time to make those decisions, hopefully earlier rather than later.
All right. Well, if you have any last questions, go ahead and get them in now before we say goodnight. But Debbie also added in the chat here, there's a national elder fraud hotline. It's a good resource for anyone who's concerned that they were a victim of a scam. She put it in the comments there, but it's 833-372-8311. And Kathy says, I appreciate the elder dependent adult abuse teams in Ventura County, APS, FAST and RRET. Which one is FAST?
Financial Abuse Specialist Team.
Gotcha. And RET?
Yes, RET is our Rapid Response Expert Team. So that is a multidisciplinary team with APS where we bring in different partners and talk about our most complicated cases and our most challenging cases, when we're able to share confidential information in that setting to really try to get help to our most challenging situations.
Very good. Well, thank you one more time, everyone, for joining us this evening, especially Detective Escalante and Supervisor Wyttenbach. If anybody has any questions at all, we'll just leave them with this. Detective Escalante's phone number is, 805, what is it? 3857
7661.
385-7661. And if anybody needs to contact or wants to contact you directly, Carmen, where can they give you a jingle?
They can reach me at 805-658-4463.
Perfect. Thanks again, everybody. If you have any questions, please feel free to send them or leave any comments on the video even after we're done, and we'll get back to you. But we did leave you with a lot of resources here tonight, and I will post that graphic again on Facebook so you can have it for the future in case any concerns come up along the way. Thank you, everybody, and have a great night.
Thank you.
Good night.